The job didn't sound like much when I first applied for it. Night security guard at an old industrial complex on the edge of town. Routine patrols, monitoring surveillance cameras, checking doors and windows, making sure nobody wandered in or out when they shouldn't. And honestly, for the pay and hours, it was perfect, quiet, mostly uneventful, and away from the chaos of day-to-day life. I showed up for my first shift just as the sun was sinking beneath the horizon, the sky melting into warm shades of orange, red, and purple that promised a clear night ahead. The air was crisp, cool, but not yet cold. It carried the scent of rusted metal, motor oil, and the faint tang of ozone from the complex's machinery. The sprawling factory campus was more labyrinth than building. Rows of warehouses, mechanical workshops, and what I guessed were storage units, all connected by narrow, dimly lit corridors and cracked, uneven pavement outside. Tall chain-link fences with barbed wire crowned the perimeter, their shadows long and menacing in the setting sun. The day crew gave me a quick rundown of procedures. Stick to the pre-assigned patrol routes. Keep the radio on at all times. Don't let curiosity get the better of me, and report any unusual activity immediately. They chuckled when I asked about supernatural stories, saying whoever told me this place was haunted probably had too much time on their hands. Still, I caught the uneasy glances they stole when thinking no one was looking. My first rounds were exactly as expected, quiet, orderly, uneventful. I savored the silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigeration units, the occasional hiss of steam vents, and the distant drone of a diesel engine somewhere beyond the fence. The peaks of old rusting machinery framed by floodlights gave it an almost alien landscape feel, otherworldly and strangely beautiful in its decay. I made my way down an endless corridor lined with locked steel doors painted in chipped gray, their surfaces riddled with scratches and peeling paint. I checked each one, noting the time on my handheld log as part of protocol. Every now and then, I glanced at the grainy black and white security monitors in my patrol pack, watching shadows stretch and retract. The solitude was comforting, but also oddly unnerving. Being alone in such a vast industrial graveyard felt like wandering through a monument to forgotten labor and obsolete technologies, filled with echoes of footsteps and voices long gone. My footsteps were the only sound for a while, soft, steady, measured, and then came the footsteps behind me. At first, they were so faint that I thought maybe it was my imagination, or a distant noise drifting in through vents. But they grew clearer, slow and deliberate, echoing lightly against the metal walls, matching the rhythm of my own steps. I stopped, turning sharply, scanning the dim corridor for any signs of movement. Nothing. The buzzing fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered faintly, casting intermittent shadows that danced just beyond view. The cold draft of air shifted, carrying the smell of moist earth and old oil. I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, the sort of tense awareness that turns a normal situation into something charged with uncertainty. "Hello?" I called softly, voice echoing strangely in the cavernous hall. No answer. I took another step forward, forcing myself to keep moving, heart pounding just a little faster. The footsteps resumed, again matching my pace, the sound steady, but without emotion or warmth. They were close now, like someone walking right behind me, just out of reach. But every time I glanced back, there was nothing but empty corridor receding into darkness. I tried telling myself it was probably the building settling, the way pipes flex or metal contracts and expands. The night shift was known for playing tricks on guards left alone with their thoughts. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that something was off. Something wasn't right. The footsteps didn't retreat or speed up. They just kept coming, following my every move with mechanical precision. When I decided to stop and face whatever was there, the sound vanished instantly, leaving me standing alone in the silence, spotlighted by the intermittent glow of the worn ceiling lights. I swallowed hard, regaining my composure. "Must be rats or the wind," I muttered, turning to continue my rounds. But the feeling didn't leave me. My instincts, honed over years growing up in rough neighborhoods, screamed caution. Over the next hour, the footsteps returned intermittently, always when the hallway was out of sight from the nearest security camera, always when I was alone. The sensation of being followed rippled through me, an unsettling companion during my patrol. At one point, I paused outside a heavy steel door marked "Restricted Access Authorized Personnel Only," its surface scratched and dented. I listened carefully, and there it was, a scrape against the metal, like fingernails dragging lightly. But when I peered through the small viewer, all I saw was cold fog drifting in the still air. That night, the silence was shattered by distant clangs and murmurs that were never explained. The factory seemed alive with unseen activity, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision. I realized I hadn't heard normal nighttime noises. No birds, no insects, not even the wind stirring the broken glass or rustling leaves. I finally finished my patrol back at the security room, my hands trembling slightly as I locked the outer door behind me. I sat before the bank of monitors, glancing nervously at each one, waiting for a sign. But the images were static and calm, or at least calm enough to make my skin crawl. The radio crackled softly, and I transmitted the first of many reports to dispatch. All quiet at the complex, no unusual activity detected. But I knew better. The footsteps lingered in my mind, echoing in the silence long after the building had settled. I learned that night one vital rule, the one unspoken in the training manuals, and ignored in casual chats over coffee. When you hear footsteps behind you in the dead of night, and there's no one there, never look back. Because some things aren't meant to be seen. Some things don't want to be acknowledged. And some shadows don't just follow, they hunt. The next few nights were a tempest of anticipation and dread. I entered the factory complex each evening with the uneasy feeling that something was waiting, watching, beyond what I could see or hear. Every step I took echoed too loudly in my ears. Every shadow deepened and lengthened, and every creak and groan of the old building seemed to summon 1,000 questions without answers. It started subtly at first. Last night, for instance, when I checked the eastern loading docks, the motion sensors that usually reported zero activity flickered erratically, cameras momentarily glitching as if someone had walked past. But the screens showed empty space. I went out to investigate, flashlight cutting through the darkness, muscles tensed. The silence welcomed me like a shroud, but the heavy smell of damp metal hung in the air. No footprints in the dusty concrete, no signs of forced entry or recent passage, just the cold, haunted silence and the faint, lingering residue of something old, forgotten. My radio crackled with static once or twice during my rounds, distorting into faint whispers I struggled to catch. I chalked it up to interference, but the idea gnawed at me. Could something or someone have been trying to talk, to warn, or to deceive? On the third night, the footsteps made their presence undeniable again. This time, I heard them clearly behind me as I navigated one of the complex's older corridors where layers of peeling paint revealed years of neglect. The metal floor plates vibrated faintly beneath my boots, the sound somehow distorted as if moving from a place that didn't quite belong to this world. I stopped abruptly. The footsteps stopped too, no longer following my pace but halting exactly when I did. A chilling mimicry that sent icy fingers of fear crawling down my spine. I turned slowly, convinced I'd find someone, anything. A prankster, a stray animal. But all the corridor held was darkness, thick and absolute. My breath came in shallow gulps. each exhale fogging the beam of my flashlight. I dared a step forward, then another, and the footsteps resumed, not behind me, but offset to the left, moving just out of view into another passage, different from the one I was facing. Heart pounding, I moved cautiously, ears straining, expecting the sound to swell, to catch up with me, but instead, the footsteps faded into the stillness like a receding wave. Something about that absence was louder. When I reported the incident to dispatch, my voice was steadier than I felt inside. "No visual confirmed," I said. Footsteps near the east hallway. No one in sight. They replied with the usual reassurances, reminding me to stay vigilant and contact immediately if the situation changed. I nodded to myself, though they couldn't see it. Over the next days, the incidents escalated. My walkie-talkie would crackle with static conversations that couldn't be decoded. Equipment would fail as if powered down by an unseen hand. The motion detectors and cameras in certain sectors blinking out and then snapping back to life with disturbing regularity. Once, the security door to the boiler room, an off-limits area, locked behind me without command and refused to open until I punched the emergency release multiple times. I felt watched, not just by cameras or sensors, but something alive, intelligent. It felt cruelly patient, biding its time, learning my patterns. Worst were the shadows. In the corner of an eye, vague and amorphous shapes appeared and vanished like ink blots in water. A flicker here, a sway there, never clear enough to focus on, but too distinct to dismiss. Sometimes whispers floated through vents, unintelligible yet unmistakably taunting, ghostly threads of sound riding the stale night air. I began marking my routes differently, checking blind spots with more intensity, swirling my flashlight in wider arcs, but nothing fully revealed itself. It was as if the entity preferred hiding in the periphery, letting my mind fill gaps, twisting ordinary noises and movements into horrors. The most unnerving disconcertion was how time and space seemed to warp. I would clock my rounds, expecting to take 30 minutes, but the watch slipped extra minutes, or minutes vanished altogether. Walking a known path felt like traversing shifting corridors that rearranged subtly when I wasn't looking, with turns where none should be, and distances growing inexplicably longer. There came a night when the temperature near one of the older furnace rooms plunged sharply, while the rest of the complex retained a stable chill. I felt a breath of cold that wasn't mine brush my neck, a whisper of frost that crawled beneath my skin like spiders. I turned, focusing through the gloom, but saw nothing. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my radio to call in a status report. The static roar answered instead, and faintly underneath, a voice hissed my name, drawn out and serpentine. "Leave!" I jumped, heart slamming against ribs like a trapped animal. I tried responding, but the crackling drowned out my voice entirely before it reached dispatch. The radio went dead. I slumped back against the cold wall, trying to steady breaths and slow the frantic thudding in my ears. The rational part of my mind fought to claim control, insisting it was just electrical interference or my overheating radio acting up. But the instinct, that primal part, told me to run. I didn't. Instead, I moved back toward the control room, alert, watching, listening. Every pair of eyes, real or imagined, felt fixed on me. Shadows pooled like ink around the edges of my flashlight beam. The silence was no longer comforting, but suffocating and pregnant with menace. When I returned to the security office, I double-checked all cameras. One lens, out of 24, was cracked, spider-webbed in a pattern that suspiciously resembled a twisted face. Last I checked, the camera was fine. I shook my head, dismissing the nonsense. Daylight would bring clarity, but daylight never came fast enough. I started to keep a journal, notes on faded footsteps, unexplained cold spots, electrical glitches, whispered threats, and the cold presence that seeped into my bones. It helped anchor me, reminding me this wasn't just paranoia. Something was manifesting in the shadows. On that second week, a newcomer arrived, a technician sent to repair flickering security systems. He was a calm, experienced guy named Mike, with a quick smile and steady hands. We shared a cigarette break outside one early morning, and he confessed to sensing the odd energy about the place himself. "You ever get the feeling that you're being watched? Not like by someone, but something else?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Every night." Mike laughed nervously. "This place has history. Men have disappeared. Machinery has broken down for reasons no one explains. Old-timers say the factory's cursed, or haunted." I didn't laugh. Our brief talk gave me a strange comfort, as though sharing the burden made the invisible weight lighter. At the same time, the footsteps grew bolder. One night, the sounds didn't stop when I stopped. They didn't echo down following hallways, but came from every direction at once. An overwhelming cacophony of steps, pace, and pattern, morphing rapidly, unrelenting, impossible to track. My blood ran cold as a shadow darted across the room, faster than anything human could move. I remembered the rule from my very first night, a rule whispered to myself with trembling lips: never look back. Because sometimes the unseen prefers you to keep walking, never knowing the danger inches behind you, waiting patiently to close the distance. I hadn't felt this alone in a long time. The emptiness of the industrial complex no longer brought the quiet comfort I'd hoped for when I took the job. Instead, it had become a cavernous void filled with something I couldn't see, but could feel, an oppressive presence that gnawed at the edges of my sanity. The strange footsteps and shadowy figures had escalated to something more ominous. It wasn't just sounds and fleeting shapes anymore. There were whispers when I was completely alone, voices fluttering in the air like dry leaves skittering across cracked concrete. At first, I convinced myself it was the wind winding through broken vents, or my imagination conjuring fears born from stress and loneliness. But the whispers soon took on an unmistakable meaning. They called my name. "Leave. Now. Go back." The words slithered through the empty halls during my late-night patrols, faint and just out of clear understanding. Not loud enough to feel threatened by, but persistent, as if whatever was speaking was trying to wear me down, to erode my resolve. One night, while checking the warehouses near the back of the complex, I stumbled on something new, a set of symbols scrawled across a rusted steel door. Speaking quietly under my breath, I traced the unusual markings with my finger, a circle enclosing jagged angular lines, each line intersecting with others in a pattern resembling a broken web or fractured glass. The symbols sent a cold shiver down my spine. They felt ancient, out of place amidst the peeling paint and grease stains of the factory. I tried to remember if I'd ever seen anything like this during the day, or heard rumors about strange symbols being spotted in the complex. Nothing came to mind. That night, I made a decision. If the place had secrets like these, I needed to know what they meant. Curiosity was a dangerous thing in the darkness, but it had to be faced. Researching during my rare breaks in the security office, I dug through online forums, old construction documents, and local legends. The facility was built over what was once farmland, owned by a reclusive man rumored to have practiced strange rituals. Over the decades, there had been multiple unexplained accidents, workers vanishing, sudden machinery malfunctions, and reports of strange lights and noises. I found a thread on a paranormal discussion forum that mentioned the cursed factory and recalled tales of unfinished business trapped in the place. Something was bound to the complex, something that had lingered long after the machines stopped and the workers left. It made sense in a twisted way. The more I learned, the more the pieces aligned with what I was experiencing, but could neither see nor explain. As the week wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes they arrived in fragmented phrases that sent chills racing down my spine. "You don't belong. It's watching. No escape." I began hearing footsteps not just behind me, but all around. Echoes bouncing in empty rooms, hesitant but relentless. The air grew thick with an almost tangible weight, as if the shadows themselves sought to suffocate the light from my flashlight. Several nights I woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, after dreams filled with black shapes reaching out to drag me into the darkness. The line between dreams and reality blurred. In the half-light of dawn, the corridor walls seemed to pulse and breathe, alive with muted murmurs. One evening, during a routine check of the security cameras, one monitor flickered to life on its own, displaying static that slowly resolved into an image of a narrow hallway I knew intimately, the place where I'd first heard the footsteps. Suddenly, a figure appeared, a vague silhouette, impossibly tall and thin, its edges hazy as if underwater. It stood motionless for a moment before vanishing, leaving only the empty corridor behind. I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was a glitch, but the feeling of being observed intensified afterward. Determined to hold on to some sense of control, I started marking the locations of every unexplained event and strange occurrence across the site. Footprints appearing, disappearing randomly, electrical surges, whispered voices in the vents, the symbols on the doors. My notes began to read like the journal of someone unraveling beneath the weight of unseen terror. But I knew what I faced wasn't imagination. One night, I found a message scratched into the interior surface of a rusted locker near the furnace room. The letters were jagged, carved hastily. "Beware the Watcher." The warning both thrilled and terrified me. What was the Watcher? An actual entity? A metaphor for the fear clawing at me? I asked myself if it was wise to dig so deep. Was I inviting something worse by snooping too far? But the fear of ignorance was stronger. I needed answers. The complex's history offered no solace. According to archival records, several workers had disappeared over the decades, some never found. Others only recovered long after cause of death was a mystery. One story told of a foreman who'd gone mad, claiming something stalked the floors at night, whispering his name and promising doom. I felt a cold kinship with those lost souls. One particularly harrowing night, I was walking near the old packaging plant, a standalone building connected by a series of catwalks and rickety stairs. The air turned bitterly cold without warning, breath steaming in thick clouds. My flashlight flickered as if struggling against an unseen force. Then came the whispers, clear, deliberate, as if spoken right into my ear. "You can't hide. It sees all." A rustling noise grew behind me, like fabric being dragged across concrete. I spun, but the corridor was empty. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. I felt the unmistakable brush of a hand against my jacket sleeve. Light as a breeze, but impossible. Fear clenched my stomach. I ran. Back in the safety of the control room, heart hammering, I pulled myself together and forced a report over the radio. My voice trembled slightly, but I was determined to keep my grip on reality, no matter how thin it felt. The dispatcher's concerned tone was my only comfort. "I'm all right," I said, half convincing even myself. That was when I decided to set up my own surveillance. I rigged extra cameras, taped snippets of audio, and started filming parts of the complex during my shifts. I hoped to catch something, any evidence to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Whatever was haunting the factory didn't want to be documented, I suspected. The cameras often went offline at critical moments or distorted footage just enough to frustrate my efforts. Still, I pressed on. The whispers, the shadows, the chilling cold spots, all pointing to a presence ancient and restless. Something tethered to the place, bound by unspeakable forces or unfinished grievances, trapped within the rust and stone of the old factory. Every night, I descended further into the darkness, both outside and within myself. The whispers in the dark grew louder. The feeling of being watched thickened like fog. The watcher waited, and I knew I was no longer just an observer. I was the hunted. The nights were growing longer, darker, and colder. Each step I took through the maze of forgotten corridors felt heavier, as if invisible weights clung to my bones. The invisible eyes that had been watching me and whispering my name were becoming bolder, more impatient, more real. I was no longer a guarded observer. I was a participant in a nightmare with no clear end. The footsteps that had followed me for weeks changed their behavior. No longer subtle echoes on the edge of hearing. They began to surround me, accelerating and decelerating unpredictably, like a hunter toying with its prey. Sometimes they ran, other times they paused just behind the closest door. When I stopped to listen, they fell silent, only to pound against the floor moments later with thunderous force. One particular night, as I made my routine rounds near the loading bays, a sudden icy gust extinguished my flashlight's beam. I fumbled with the switch, but the old device failed me. Darkness swallowed everything around me, thick and absolute. I cursed under my breath and started to move cautiously, hands reaching out to steady myself against the cold metal walls. That's when I felt it, a breath, not my own. A warm, fetid exhale barely brushed the back of my neck, as if something whispered close enough to sting. Fear gripped me harder than ever before. Whirling around, I expected to confront some dark figure, or at least a prankster. But the shadows deepened like ink in the forgotten corners. Nothing stirred, nothing breathed. A faint rustling echoed nearby. My heart hammered. I raised my voice, trembling but determined. "Who's there? Show yourself!" No answer, only distant echoes of dripping water and my own ragged breaths. Then a sudden flash caught my eye, just a flicker of movement in the corner of the bay. I swung toward it, but whatever was there dissolved into the darkness with unnatural speed. I ran. Back in the security office, hands shaking, I scanned the monitors. Nothing out of place. No intruder. No animal. No glitch. Just the steady pulse of static and gray screens. I wasn't alone. Throughout the night, little incidents piled up. A door locking and unlocking without command. Lights flickering in a sequence that resembled a staccato heartbeat. Tools sliding off benches and clattering on concrete floors with no discernible cause. The air shifted bizarrely between suffocating stillness and sudden gusts that chilled me to the bone. The entity's presence wasn't limited to sounds or shadows anymore. It was starting to manipulate the environment, twitching the strings of reality. Sometimes, when I'd pause in the corridors, the space around me would warp, the walls breathing softly as if alive, narrowing then expanding in impossible rhythms. I heard distant footsteps echoing along stairways that led nowhere, and caught glimpses of dark shapes peering from half-open doors before vanishing into the gloom. My restless nights spawned dreams darker than the corridors I patrolled. Visions of twisted faces with hollow eyes, mouths opening in silent screams, and hands clawing toward me from behind walls and floors. I'd wake gasping, covered in cold sweat, the echoes of phantom footsteps ringing in my ears. One particularly harrowing night, the whispers turned into voices. Not disjointed murmurs, but clear, sinister phrases slithering through the vents. "You cannot escape. The Watcher is near." I froze in place, every nerve screaming to run, to flee, but rooted like a tree in a storm. The radio in my hand crackled violently, as a voice, almost inaudible, spat into the static. A voice not human, something alien and ancient. For the first time, I truly believed I was dealing with something beyond explanation. Days became a blur of adrenaline-fueled inspections and restless sleep. I rationed coffee and cigarettes, both of which felt woefully inadequate armor against the crushing weight of fear pressing on me. I confided in Mike, the technician, during one brief daylight overlap. He listened without judgment, sharing that he, too, had experienced moments when the lights would flicker ominously and shadows stretched in unnatural ways. "Maybe this place remembers," he said somberly. "Like a scar, it can't heal." One night, the encounters became terrifyingly personal. While checking the loading docks, a figure emerged from the darkness. A silhouette tall, impossibly thin, and blurred at the edges like it was bleeding into the night itself. Its features were vague but haunting. Two black voids where eyes should have been stared at me with empty hunger. I froze. The figure slowly raised a hand, not threatening, but beckoning, before vanishing in a flicker of darkness like a dying candle. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, nearly falling, and scrambled for my radio to call for backup. No response, except static. I realized then that I was utterly alone, not just physically, but in every sense. The entity had cut off all lifelines, isolating me in a maze of shadows and whispers. Returning to the office was a desperate effort. I moved erratically now, changing my routes, doubling back, always expecting to feel that cold breath again, to hear footsteps behind me, or worse. Every darkened hallway became a gauntlet. That night, as I reached the monitoring room, I caught a glimpse of the shattered camera lens again, the spiderweb cracks that resembled a twisted, leering face. A whisper escaped from the shadows, a voice chillingly near. "Leave, now, or stay forever." My hands trembled as I backed away toward the exit doors. The factory that had once seemed so mundane and monotonous was now an arena of fear, cruelty, and relentless dread, and I was the unwilling protagonist. The fear that had gripped me was no longer lurking in shadows or whispered footsteps. It had settled deep in my bones, coiling tightly around my mind. The factory complex was no longer just a workplace. It was a labyrinth of dread, where the past hung thick in the stagnant air, and ancient secrets whispered from every cracked wall. I knew I had to uncover the truth behind what stalked these halls. If I didn't, I risked becoming just another forgotten casualty of this cursed place. During the daylight hours, when the factory's grim facade was bathed in sunlight and the hum of machinery echoed faintly through the air, I delved into the archives. The intricate maze of dusty filing cabinets, yellowed blueprints, and weathered journals hidden away in the administrative wing became my sanctuary. Surrounded by piles of old documents and photographs, I searched for answers that might explain the presence that haunted my nights. I found the building's construction records, almost 50 years old, detailing the factory's origins. It was built in the early 1970s by a small company that quickly went bankrupt. The archival files mentioned a series of strange incidents during construction, mysterious injuries, unexplained equipment failures, and most disturbingly, the disappearance of several workers. Digging deeper, I stumbled upon faded newspaper clippings taped to brittle pages. Headlines screamed about "Workers vanish without a trace at mill factory," and "Unexplained deaths haunt new industrial site." The articles described how frightened employees left in waves, convinced the factory was cursed. Supervisors dismissed these fears as superstition, but the uneasy whispers in the community persisted. One article caught me particularly off guard. It spoke of a late-night accident nearly rivaling an urban legend. A foreman named Henry Caldwell, who had supposedly gone mad before disappearing in the factory's bowels, leaving behind cryptic notes about the Watcher and unseen eyes that never blink. The notes, once recovered, were fragmented and obscured, filled with a desperate urgency. "The Watcher waits, eyes everywhere, can't escape. Not shadows, but something worse. feeds on fear, stays beneath the floor. Must warn them, must. The imagery sent shivers down my spine. It read like the ravings of a man slowly losing his mind, or someone who had glimpsed horrors no one should. As I pieced together this forgotten history, I discovered other chilling clues. Maps marking sealed-off parts of the factory, blueprints showing hidden rooms and tunnels beneath the building, and maintenance logs detailing odd structural reinforcements done abruptly years ago without explanation. Most unsettling, though, were records of unexplained power surges and system failures, correlating perfectly with reported paranormal activity on the premises. The idea of something trapped beneath the factory, something ancient and malevolent, was no longer fiction. I realized the entity was not just a restless spirit or stray shadow. It was an echo of a buried past, an unfinished business anchored to the site's darkest secrets. Determined to confront whatever lurked beneath, I coordinated with Mike, the technician. Using the old blueprints as a guide, we located a heavily reinforced basement door concealed behind peeling wallpaper in an unused office. The lock was rusted, but yielded to Mike's skillful tools. As the door creaked open, a wave of cold, stale air rushed out. The narrow staircase descending into blackness seemed to lead away from the light of sanity. We armed ourselves with flashlights and the meager protection of simple tools. In this dark abyss, even the familiar felt alien. The chamber below was a cavernous network of catwalks and pipes, coated in decades of dirt, rust, and neglect. Faint echoes toyed with our senses as we navigated the labyrinth, every sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. Along the walls, strange symbols appeared, etched deep into the stone and metal. They mirrored the ones I had found on the rusted doors above, their shapes twisted and interlocked, resembling ancient runes or seals designed to imprison or protect. At the heart of the chamber, we found a pit, a gaping maw worn into the floor like some abyssal wound. Around it lay remnants of old equipment and suspect signs of ritual, shattered glass, chalk markings on the ground, and fragments of burned paper. I recognized something horrifying in those symbols and the pit itself, an ancient containment, a barrier against something powerful and malevolent. And then came the sound, a low, guttural growl vibrating through the air like the rumble of an earthquake. We froze. The dark pit seemed to ripple, as if breathing, pulsing with unseen energy. The air grew thick and suffocating, filled with a sickly sweet stench of decay and iron. I shone my flashlight downward, catching a glimpse of movement, shadows writhing beneath the surface, eyes glinting faintly in the dark. A deep voice echoed in my mind, not spoken aloud, but felt in my very soul. "You must not disturb the watcher." We backed away slowly, hearts pounding, every instinct screaming to flee before the darkness swallowed us whole. As we ascended back into the upper levels, the weight of what I'd uncovered pressed heavily on me. The factory wasn't just haunted, it was a prison, holding at bay a force ancient and cruel, a predator feeding on fear and despair, waiting patiently. I realized then that the footsteps, the whispers, and the chilling presence were not random, but part of a calculated hunt. The Watcher was watching, and now it had eyes on me. The discovery beneath the factory weighed on me like a curse. I knew the truth now. The Watcher was more than a shadow or a ghost. It was a predator, ancient and relentless, locked away but no longer content to remain hidden. Every night since that night in the chamber, its presence grew stronger, more daring, more personal. I had begun to feel hunted. That night began like any other, quiet, routine. The factory cloaked in darkness except for the weak glow of emergency lights. But the familiar hum and creak of the building felt different, as if the very walls were alive with malevolent intent, primed and ready to pounce. The footsteps returned swiftly, louder than ever, pounding across corridors not coinciding with my route, but closing in. 3 sets, maybe more, echoing from multiple directions, closing the net. Panic surged, but I forced myself to remain calm. Drawing my flashlight and radio, I started to move, trying to outpace the unseen pursuer, my breath ragged but controlled. I darted through winding passageways, my footsteps clattering against concrete. At every corner, I glanced behind, never daring to meet those footsteps face to face, but feeling them snap at my heels. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang erupted behind me, a heavy gate banging closed just as I reached an intersection. I spun, shining my light down the shadowy hall, but nothing stirred. I pushed onward into the darker heart of the factory, the smell of decay growing stronger, mingling with a cold mist that curled like fingers around me. My radio crackled, static, then a chilling whisper. "You can't run!" Fear tightened its grip, but I refused to stop. My hand shook as I gripped the radio, trying to respond, but my voice was swallowed by the crashing static. Ahead, I saw a faint glow, the emergency exit, my ticket to escape. With everything I had, heart racing, lungs burning, I sprinted toward it, but the chase was far from over. A shadow flickered to my left, darted between pillars like liquid darkness. My flashlight caught glimpses of a figure impossible to identify. Elongated limbs, angular and unnatural. A distorted silhouette born of nightmare. It was moving fast, too fast. Branches of adrenaline spiked through me as I weaved through obstacles, ducking beneath pipes and overtangled cables. I heard the agonized wails of static from the radio, voices melding into a cacophony, pressing in on me. The factory had become a labyrinth of terror, a realm where the laws of physics bent and shattered. In one breathless moment, I stumbled toward a stairwell, its metal grate slippery beneath my boots. I scrambled up, one rung at a time, the shadow gaining on me. As I reached the top floor, the footsteps ceased abruptly. Silence blanketed the space, thick and suffocating. I dared a glance behind. Nothing. Just an empty corridor lit faintly by the flickering overhead lights. I caught my breath, heart hammering wildly. The agony of the chase was fading, but terror was far from over. The alarms blared suddenly, a piercing wail that shattered the suffocating quiet and sent vibrations through the building's bones. I realized the shutdown complex was awakening. Electrical systems surged unpredictably. Lights flickered wildly. Machinery groaned to jittering life. The Watcher was calling its domain awake. Unable to resist, I knew I had one choice: confront the darkness or be consumed by it. With trembling hands, I gathered what equipment I could: flashlight, radio, a crowbar I found nearby, anything to defend myself. Every shadow seemed to coil and stretch, alive with unseen menace. The air itself thrummed with danger. I moved toward the central control room, where cameras monitored the entire complex. If I could regain surveillance control, maybe, just maybe, I could turn the Watcher's own domain against it. The silence in the control room was eerie, heavy with anticipation. I powered up the monitors one by one. Static hissed at first, then images flickered into view. Corridors I knew like the back of my hand. And then, a figure appeared on a screen. Not glimpsed in passing, but fully formed. An impossibly tall, slender shape, standing motionless at the corridor's end. Its empty gaze seemed to pierce the cameras themselves. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. The Watcher was watching, but through the screens, I spotted a flicker, a weakness, a momentary disruption in the camera feed at a junction near the main door. A chance. I radioed Mike. "Mike, get to the main gate. I'm opening it from here. We need to get the hell out." Static filled my ear in reply. "On my way." The next minutes stretched like hours. I navigated the controls, overriding locked doors, relighting sections of the complex to buy myself time. Outside, I heard the distant crunch of footsteps. Not mine, but Mike's. Relief surged. Then a low, horrific growl trembled through the building, resonating from the deepest tunnels below. The ground seemed to tremble underfoot. Lights flickered violently. The watcher was enraged. Suddenly, a blast of cold air slammed into the room. My flashlight flickered and died. Panic clawed at my throat. I felt the breath, hot and foul, on my neck. Frozen, I whispered into the darkness. "Who are you? What do you want?" A voice, ancient and horrible, answered, echoing with the weight of centuries. "You brought the light, but the darkness hunts still." The radio crackled sharply. "Run!" Mike's urgent voice. I didn't hesitate. Grabbing the crowbar, I bolted toward the exit, heart thrashing in my chest. The chase wasn't over. The labyrinth had become alive, twisting, turning to trap me. But this time, I wasn't moving blindly. I knew the stakes. I was hunting, or being hunted. And this time, I wasn't going down without a fight. The exit doors slammed behind me with a finality that echoed through the hollow corridors. Yet even with that protection, I could feel the Watcher's presence lingering just beyond the faint light, filtering through cracked windows. The factory, once a place of mundane monotony, had become a battleground between my fading sanity and a darkness ancient beyond understanding. I barely dared to breathe as I ran, crowbar clenched tightly. My every sense screamed for escape. But somewhere deep inside, a stubborn ember of defiance blazed. I wasn't going to vanish without facing whatever nightmare stalked me. I rounded a corner and froze. There, illuminated by stuttering emergency lights, stood the Watcher, tall, impossibly thin and distorted, as though its form existed between reality and shadow. Its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin, if it had flesh, was the hue of bruised steel. The hollow eye socket stared without eyes, and its mouth was a gaping void, silently screaming. For a moment, time itself seemed to halt. My heart thundered against ribs like a war drum. The air tasted thick, metallic, suffused with the profound weight of death. Then the creature moved, not with steps, but gliding, a slow, predatory approach that bent space around it. The ground beneath it seemed to ripple like water disturbed by an unseen stone. I raised the crowbar, trembling but resolute. "You don't belong here," it whispered, not with a voice, but an echo inside my mind. "This domain is mine." I gritted my teeth, stepping back cautiously, searching for any sign of weakness. Desperate flashes of light sparked from my dying flashlight, casting fleeting halos around us. Questions flooded me. What was it? Why did it linger here? Was it trapped, like I once understood, or something far worse, free and malevolent? The Watcher stopped mere feet away, and the air grew colder still. I felt my strength ebb, a terrifying churn of despair threatening to swallow me whole. But I couldn't succumb. With every ounce of will, I swung the crowbar. The solid clang echoed hollowly, the weapon passing through shadow as if striking mist. The Watcher laughed then, a low, bone-chilling sound that resonated in my soul. It lifted a spectral hand, and the world twisted. Suddenly, I was no longer in the control room or factory, but an endless void of darkness pierced with faint stars. Cold, silent, infinite. The Watcher's face appeared all around me, morphing and fracturing into 1,000 twisted reflections. "You see now," it hissed, "beyond flesh and bone, beyond time's grasp." Panic surged, choking my breath. I clawed at the void, desperate for anything. Light, warmth, reality, and then a memory, sharp and clear, pierced through the nightmare. A daytime moment, months ago before my shifts began. A forgotten conversation with an elderly janitor who had worked the factory in its prime. He'd told me about the factory's foundation built over sacred land, desecrated by greed and ignorance. "The earth remembers," he'd said quietly, "and it doesn't forgive." That memory anchored me. Turning defiance into fuel, I cried out, "I'm not afraid of you!" The void shuddered. The Watcher's form wavered, fracturing like a broken mirror. Seizing the moment, I focused every fragment of my mind on the tangible factory. The icy metal beneath my fingers, the sharp scent of oil, the rhythmic hum of distant machinery. With a rush, reality snapped back. The Watcher's scream echoed as it recoiled, retreating into shadows that bled down walls and floors. I was free, for now. Collapsed against a wall, breath ragged, I knew this battle was far from over. The Watcher was powerful, ancient, but wounded. And I was its tormentor, as much as it was mine. Leaving the control room flooded with weak emergency light, I limped through the factory halls. Mike's sudden appearance startled me. "We've got to get out of here," he urged, eyes wide. Dash, dash. "No." I shook my head with determination I barely felt. "Not yet. I need to finish this." Mike looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but nodded reluctantly. Together, we ventured deeper into the factory's forbidden wings, toward forgotten chambers sealed long ago. The walls here whispered with age, voices half remembered, mingling with the sharp scent of rust and ruin. The Watcher's presence thickened around us, faceless eyes in every shadow. But I carried a strange hope. I had faced the darkness, and though it recoiled, it had left behind a secret, something vulnerable, something that might be the key to banishing this nightmare forever. We reached a hidden hatch in the floor, concealed beneath years of dust and debris. With trembling hands, I forced it open. A spiral staircase descended into blackness. One step at a time, we descended. The air grew colder, heavier. At the bottom, a chamber revealed itself, a place of ritual and power. Symbols from the walls above were etched deeply into stone floors, encircling a pedestal. On the pedestal lay a book, its leather cracked and ancient. I approached cautiously. Opening the book, I found pages filled with a strange language, symbols that pulsed faintly with eerie light. Through the book, I glimpsed the history of the Watcher, an entity bound by dark magic to guard a terrible secret, cursed to eternal vigilance. Its power stemmed from fear, feeding off those trapped in its domain. But the book spoke of a ritual, a way to break the bonds, a chance for freedom. I shared this with Mike. "We have to try. It might be our only way." As we prepared the ritual, the factory seemed to hold its breath. The Watcher's shadow darkened the room, swirling like smoke. This was the moment of truth. We stood defiant against the darkness. The battle for the factory and for our souls had come to a head. The night stretched on around us like an endless shadow, thick and suffocating, as Mike and I prepared for the ritual inscribed in that ancient tome. Flickering candlelight cast uneasy dancing shapes upon the factory's crumbling walls, where decades of neglect and rust still held the weight of untold horrors. Everything about this moment seemed to defy reason, and yet it was the only chance we had to end the nightmare that had consumed my life. I traced the cryptic symbols from the book onto the cold stone floor, repeating the whispered incantations under my breath, their foreign syllables baking into the air like a warning. The language felt wrong in my mouth, clumsy and alien, but somehow the words resonated deep within me, awakening a force belied by the factory's decay. Mike stood at my side, eyes wide but steady. His presence was the only tether keeping me from plunging headlong into despair. Despite our mounting fear, we worked in silent synchronicity, ritual tools clenched tightly, awaiting the culminating moment. The air shifted suddenly. A chill, deeper than any before, poured through the chamber like spilled ink, swirling with undeniable malevolence. The Watcher appeared before us, its form more defined, more terrifying than ever. Great jagged angles fractured its shape like broken glass, yet it radiated an eerie intelligence. Its hollow eyes bored into me, nakedly expressing centuries of fury, loneliness, and hunger. "You think your weak words can free you?" It hissed silently, the voice echoing in our minds like a death knell. "I am eternal." I clenched my jaw, voice trembling but resolute. "No, you're bound by fear and darkness. Tonight, that ends." The chamber trembled violently. Shadows writhed like living beasts, pouring from the corners toward the altar of symbols beneath my feet. I could feel the force trying to break me, shatter my determination, drown my thoughts in hopelessness. Mike's hand gripped mine in a fierce clasp. Without his steady touch, I might have crumbled. I recited the final verse. Then, a searing light exploded from the stone markings in a blinding wave. The watcher screamed, a sound raw and terrible, shaking the very foundation of the factory. Its form cracked and splintered, like ancient ice breaking beneath a storm. The darkness recoiled, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Exhausted, I slumped to the floor, heart hammering, body trembling. The heavy grip of fear loosened its hold. The weight of years lifted. We had done it, or so I thought. The factory seemed transformed, the rotten scent of decay replaced by fresh air faintly tinged with pine and rain. Morning's pale light spilled through broken windows for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Mike smiled weakly. We made it, but as we rose, a creeping unease flooded me. Though the watcher appeared defeated, remnants of its darkness lingered. Whispers drifted faintly, warnings melting into the edges of the new day. You can never really escape. We exited into the waking world, stepping carefully through the now peaceful factory. Outside, the sun was climbing, casting golden light over the factory's rusted skeleton. For the first time, I could breathe without the crushing presence of unseen eyes. But questions gnawed at me. Was this truly over? Or had we only delayed an ancient evil? Days turned into weeks. The warnings faded, shadows shrank, and the factory's eerie stillness returned to mere silence. My life slowly returned to normal, yet sometimes, in the quiet moments, before sleep, or when the wind rustles just right, I swear I hear faint footsteps, and a whisper, watchful, waiting, forever.